How do you like living in this camp?
Well, it ain't too bad, but there's some kind of people what don't like us, you see. We don't like them and they don't like us.
Who are they, the people in the village?
Yes, that's right, sir.
Do you ever go down there and mix with them at all?
No, sir. Only just as they call your names when you walk by, like, you know.
Some of the gypsies were given a council house in this little estate here and came to live near. How would you feel about it?
Well, I wouldn't like it really, but if it had to be, well, I should hope that they weren't too close to me.
Overt, full-on racism is supposed to be a bit more taboo now, aside from the occasional anti-Muslim pogrom or anti-black police brutality, of course. British racism is more passive, supposedly. It's denied, ignored, or dressed up in polite language. But when it comes to travellers and Roma people, the mask comes off. Businesses blacklist them, politicians vilify them, entire communities are displaced, surveilled, and made to feel a threat for simply existing. We're talking about one of Britain's most overlooked and acceptable forms of racism, and the Roma and traveller communities who've bore the brunt of it for hundreds of years. Let's clear a few things up first. When people say Gypsy, usually they're grouping together various different communities. Roma people historically descend from what's now India, having migrated over the course of hundreds of years into Europe. They aren't the same as Irish travellers, who are indigenous to Ireland, a distinct ethnic group with their own language, history and culture. Both are highly misunderstood, and they encounter similar problems due to their nomadic lifestyles, or rather people's reaction to them. Back in 1530, in response to the early arrivals of Roma people into England, Parliament passed the Egyptians Act. The word Egyptian was used due to the false belief that the Romani people came from Egypt. The law forbade them from entering the country, and those that were already there had to leave within 16 days or face imprisonment, property seizure, or even execution. But this wasn't a one-off thing. Over the centuries, laws across Europe stripped Roma and traveller people of their rights, forced them into settlement, denied them education, and branded them criminals just for moving around, with increasingly authoritarian freedom of movement laws. During the Holocaust, hundreds of thousands, some even estimating over 1 million, Roma people and those mistaken for them were murdered by the Nazis during World War II, in a genocide now known in the Romani language as the Parajmos, or the Devouring. And unlike with other Holocaust victims, that chapter of Roma suffering still hasn't been properly acknowledged. No mass memorials, no deep societal reckoning. That's why people like Jimmy Carr, a mainstream British comedian, felt emboldened and safe enough to make abhorrent so-called jokes like this.
When people talk about the Holocaust, they talk about the tragedy and horror of 6 million Jewish lives being lost to the Nazi war machine. But they never mention the thousands of gypsies that were killed by the Nazis. No one ever wants to talk about that because no one ever wants to talk about the positives.
That denial continues today, in policies, in headlines, in the reactions of people when they hear the word gypsy. But let's now take a look at the many ways Roma and traveller people are discriminated against today. One of the more well-documented forms of discrimination that Roma and traveller people deal with is refusal of service. This takes form in a variety of ways, one of which are blocking and barring traveller families from booking venues for events such as weddings, or cancelling after getting wise to the fact that they've hired their venues out to a traveller family. But there are a couple more high-profile recent cases. In 2022, pub franchise Greene King apologised and paid damages after they admitted that a group of 12 travellers planning to watch a Tyson Fury fight were in fact kicked out because they were travellers. The Traveller Movement, a charity supporting Gypsy, traveller and Roma communities, also took Witherspoons to court after members of the community refused entry into one of their pubs. Witherspoons were then ordered to pay compensation after a lengthy 3-year legal battle. And in a more shockingly overt case of anti-traveller racism, British holiday park company Pontins were found to be providing staff with a blacklist of 40 Irish surnames to prevent bookings from Irish traveller families, printed out on letters with a Gandalf saying, "You shall not pass," and explicitly referring to travellers as unwelcome and undesirable guests. And like Greene King, Pontins were sorry. come the fuck on. And these are just 3 high-profile cases of refusal of service in action. For travellers, this is a regular occurrence. Companies like Greene King or Pontins were forced to apologise and pay up, not because they were actually sorry, but because they got caught out and called out for their racism. Anti-gypsyism isn't just professed by locals and businesses. They are in fact emboldened because this discrimination is a top-down process. Politicians get off scot-free when expressing anti-traveller sentiment, and this is across the board. A slew of MPs and councillors, including unashamed traveller hater and Reform MP Lee Anderson, derogatory now deleted tweets by newly elected Labour Mayor of the North East, Kim McGuinness, as well as MSP and ex-leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Douglas Ross, to name a few. The institutions and organisations we're supposed to rely on to hold these people accountable, to hold truth to power, they launder the narrative and they enforce the stereotypes. The media plays a crucial role in perpetuating stereotypes and inciting public outrage. Scapegoats are created by the media and exploited by politicians. Sound familiar? Because it is. Local news outlets across the country are literally anti-traveller rage bait machines. Week in, week out publishing stories about traveller movements, their comings and goings, and interviewing residents expressing clear anti-traveller sentiment in an effort to incite outrage and hysteria in local communities. Aside from this, on national TV, a plethora of documentaries and TV shows which, according to Roma and travellers' rights organisations, misrepresent the lived realities of these communities. A Channel 4 Dispatches documentary focused on alleged criminal activity linked to traveller sites, using selective statistics and anecdotes to imply a link between traveller communities and higher rates of crime. They were criticised for relying on techniques such as ominous music and nighttime filming to evoke fear. The traveller movement condemned it, stating it sowed division and left the traveller community vulnerable to hate crime and abuse. And in similar fashion to poverty porn style reality TV such as Benefit Street or Jeremy Kyle, these programs exist to create a narrative of vilification of the most vulnerable segments of our society. They're an easy target, one which has virtually no public voice or high-profile mainstream advocacy to protect them. This is the reason why anti-traveller racism by politicians and businesses go unchecked. There is no backlash. You don't get cancelled for using anti-traveller or anti-Roma slurs. Now, what you may not know is that media depictions, hate speech by politicians, and general negative sentiment in society directed at traveller and Roma communities have culminated in these ethnic groups having some of the worst mental health outcomes in the entire country, according to research published by the NHS Race and Health Observatory. It is estimated that the suicide rate of this group is up to 7 times higher than all other communities, and that they have a life expectancy of up to 10 years less than the national population average. The report attributes a number of factors to this, citing and confirming the findings of previous research and literature. They identify fear of authorities, the stigma of mental health issues, the need to collect specific data, and the problem of stoicism. Chris McDonough, an Irish traveller and campaigns officer at Friends, Families and Travellers, said, "Sadly, nearly every traveller family has experienced, personally or by extension, a suicide." This report gives a glimpse into the mental health problems these families have historically faced. Arguably, all of these issues can be traced back, at least in part, to a vicious cycle fueled by discrimination. Why wouldn't travellers and Roma be sceptical of interacting with non-traveller, non-Roma people or institutions outside of their communities? Why else do they have a need to be stoic? To understand the vicious cycle of conflict between traveller and non-traveller communities, it must be known that for every negative experience that someone claims to have had with a traveller or a traveller community, they're ignorant of the fact that they experience a world where they are an alienated and dehumanized other, with little prospect of social acceptance. The likelihood of unconscious bias, considering how anti-Gypsyism is an accepted norm, must be factored into conflicts between different communities. Social exclusion isn't just a reaction to difference, it creates difference. When a group is denied equal access to schools, to healthcare, and to housing, while also being vilified in the press, it creates the very conditions that lead to social isolation, mistrust, and intergroup tension. That's not a cultural flaw, that's structural violence. In many places, traveller sites are not just marginal, they're scarce in number, and their ability to practice their way of life is always in danger. Monitored, policed, and constantly under the threat of eviction. When your presence is always framed as suspicious, conflict becomes inevitable. The supposed insularity of traveller communities is often framed as self-imposed and hostile to outsiders. In reality, it's a rational response to centuries of being hounded, excluded, and attacked. It's not a wall. They're shielding themselves. It's intergenerational trauma and social exhaustion. Once again, a big thank you to my Patreon. Please consider becoming a member if you enjoy my content. While you're here, why not learn more about Britain's favourite war criminal, or about apartheid South Africa and Israel?